But there is one country in Europe that is cash level cucked, and that country is Germany. And even German leadership has been openly saying that Iran has embarrassed America. So when you got German leadership, Merz specifically, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, the man with the most expensive haircut of all time, with nothing to show for it, coming out and saying Iran is humiliating the US, that's when you know things have gotten out of hand. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz questioned the U.S. exit strategy in Iran, warning Washington is being humiliated as Tehran negotiates very skillfully and appears stronger than expected. Speaking to students in Marsburg, he urged a swift end to the conflict, citing mounting economic fallout for Germany. Let's hear what he had to say. The Americans obviously have no strategy. We have seen this very painfully in Afghanistan for 20 years.
Das haben wir ganz schmerzhaft bei Afghanistan gesehen. 20 Jahre.
We've seen that in Iraq.
Wir haben das im Irak gesehen. Also diese Geschichte
So this story is, as I said, at least ill-considered.
Und ich erkenne im Augenblick
I don't recognize at the moment which strategic exit the Americans are now choosing, especially since the Iranians are obviously negotiating very cleverly, and then let the Americans travel to Islamabad and leave again without results. It humiliates an entire nation. The Iranian government, particularly through the so-called Revolutionary Guards, and I don't see how that can be achieved in the short term, because the Iranians are obviously stronger than expected, and the Americans, clearly, they do not have a really convincing strategy in the negotiations either. Friedrich Merz, I think, genuinely nutted when America bombed Iran alongside Israel, okay? He might have actually dropped the fat rope on camera when he found out. He was so giddy. Friedrich Merz, who has famously said things like, Israel is doing our dirty work. That man is now saying Americans are embarrassing themselves. Iran is putting belt to ass. This was the Chancellor's statement. The USA and Israel have been conducting massive military strikes against Iran since Saturday. Chancellor Merz is in close contact with European partners, Israel, and partners in the region. He will discuss developments with U.S. President Trump in Washington on Tuesday. The regime threatened Israel's existence, was responsible for the terror of Hamas and Hezbollah, and its nuclear and missile programs threaten peace and security, said the Chancellor. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome on the situation in the Middle East. On this beautiful Sunday, in recent days and weeks, we witnessed an unprecedented number of wars and upheaval, both around the world and in our neighborhood. The lines of conflict are becoming increasingly blurred. Existing rules, including those of international law, are disregarded more and more. By America and Israel, by the way, but he says it's by Hamas and Iran. Another Merz clip has hit the timeline. Oh my God. At this point, I'm disillusioned simply because US and Israel claimed at the beginning that they could solve this problem within days. Now I must recognize it is not solved. He said Germany and the EU have also have own European ideas on how to get a resolution of the conflict and will continue their diplomatic coordination with the US. Underway again for Germany for some time now. Oh, dude, he's doing bilateral talks with Iran. Oh my God. Oh my God. Iran is literally forcing multipolarity. That's crazy. I cannot believe it. It's unheard of. I will be honest with you, I never thought it would be Iran. Like, I thought, multipolarity being forced upon the world by the likes of another warring party like Russia, certainly. Right? And this doesn't justify Russia's actions, by the way. I'm not saying that like Russia was justifiable in invading Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't think they are. But that was shaking the system, right? That was shaking and shook America's hegemonic status, especially because after, multiple years at this point, the entirety of the Western world's support has not been able to successfully purge Russia from the boundaries of Ukraine. Again, I'm not saying this is good, okay? I'm not saying that. I know a lot of you get very sensitive around the Ukraine issue when you hear someone that has a different perspective than you. And I have to be extra sensitive and extra careful when I talk about Ukraine. Now that I know Ukraine objectively has shooters in the United States of America, I don't want to be the target of their enmity, okay? I apologize, Dylan Burns. Please don't send your Fedayeen after me, okay? I don't want Ryan Ruth, his 1,000 NATO-trained Afghan soldiers, or Cole Allen to come and assassinate me. I'm not the fucking president. So I have to be extra careful on this issue, just qualifying all my statements. But here's the thing. I would have expected Russia to force America's hand and show the European partners that there are other regional powers out there who are capable of being insane enough and like break the system of unipolarity, break the system of American hegemony. I never thought that country would be Iran. I guess these things work in coordination and tandem with one another, but Iran, by simply approaching this issue because they see it as a crisis of survival and being steadfast in their defense of their own sovereignty, has forced the hand of European counterparts that have been vassals for far too long into bilateral commitments with Iran. I mean, I don't know what those commitments are going to look like. I suspect that any kind of decision making that does not involve the United States of America, any kind of bilateral decision making with Iran, is a major step against American hegemony. And Iran would not have this much success in getting assurances from European allies if it wasn't Donald Trump leading the helm, leading the war effort. If it was a competent Republican, for example, or if it was a competent Democrat, I think they would do a lot better as far as maintaining relationships. They probably would not have invaded Iran. We know this because even the most insane, the most intensely ultra-Zionist leadership on the Democratic side with Joe Biden objectively did not bomb Iran, right? They were training for it. They were training for the opportunity. And if you believe Amos Hochstein, they were going to do it, but they didn't. Trump did. Trump took it there. And not only did Trump take it there, but Trump has also been undermining its global partners, its NATO partners that are profoundly important to maintaining American military-industrial contracts, maintaining American interests all around the globe, as Mark Rutte has openly admitted, right? I think all of that is the reason why even these goddamn servile cucks that are in charge of great industrial powers like Germany, the economic engine that runs the European Union, are finally saying, yeah, maybe we got to reconsider America's position on the global stage. It's kismet. It's perfectly chaotic. And some might even assume this was an inevitability considering how vast the American empire was, spread too thin, right? No country can be everywhere all at once and be a domineering force for thousands of years. So there was an inevitability that the end of American empire would come, but I do think Donald Trump has accelerated the demise. I guess the accelerationists were right in that regard. Merz is a waffling cretin, militarizing Germany, radicalizing society, and losing support faster than Starmer, making a takeover by the post-Nazi AfD all but inevitable. The bigger question here is if the Americans are as strategically stupid as Merz is saying, why do Germany and the rest of the European leadership insist on tying their future to them? Where is Germany or Europe's independent strategy on Iran? Didn't Merz issue, together with Macron and Starmer, a joint statement at the beginning of the war condemning Iran for the war? Doesn't that make them even more strategically inept when your own public diagnosis is that the ship is sinking and your response is to stay on board? This is just vassalage with editorial commentary, which is even more strategically stupid than whatever Trump is doing. Yeah, I mean, if this kind of negative sentiment is not tied with like bilateral commitments that undermine America's interests, then it's nothing. Then yeah, you are even dumber than Donald Trump, right? It's true. When he says Germany and the EU have their own European ideas on how to get a resolution on the conflict that will continue their diplomatic efforts in coordination with the US, perhaps they will do that. I don't know what that looks like as it stands currently. I don't have a lot of confidence in especially this crop of European leadership, because many of them are still very much neoliberals, very much center-right figures, very much figures that are invested in defending the interests of the same international consortium of capital that the American leadership is invested in defending the interests of. I don't know where they will go, but this is opening up potentially new opportunities. Once again, it'll just never not be funny that these guys know how fucking stupid Donald Trump is. They know how childish he is, and they're at the mercy of the whims of a madman. And they have to play ball, and they have to glaze him, and they have to like humiliate themselves. They have to debase themselves to ensure that they do not receive the wrath of American empire. They're like, please, Mr. President, don't invade a NATO country. That was the conversation, remember. These guys that have talked about how big of a threat Russia is to European security had to now cover their left flank out of nowhere. They were like, what? What do you mean you are going to militarily annex a piece of the European continent? You already have bases everywhere. What are you talking about? And every time Donald Trump gets mad, he floats that shit over and over again. Part of the reason why the king is here in the United States, aside from his joint session address, is because he has to explain that Canada is a part of the Commonwealth. As in, if he's trying to urge Trump by using his symbolic status and Trump's interest in the royal family to stop him from militarily annexing parts of Canada. It sounds like a joke. If you were to tell me 20 years ago that this is what would be happening right now, like that the American president was threatening to militarily annex Canada, threatened to militarily annex parts of Europe, and that he had the attitude of a baby, like a child, and that the British king or the queen at the time would have to do a visit to beg the American president not to invade Canada and to remind or educate the person, the American president, that like Canada is a part of the Commonwealth, so you're technically invading, a part of the great British Empire. I would assume that, I would say that's unbelievable. There's just no shot. 14-year-old Hassan was probably too busy jorking it to listen, though. True.